And our final speaker for today is my good friend Vida Velasco. Vita's with Stand With Us. There's so many different organizations. Stand With Us. We first met on an APAC trip to Israel about 3.5 years ago, and she has been here before, and she is going to speak on BDS. Now, if you've probably walked by the Stand With Us table out there, and they have a number of really great pamphlets. Their literature is just tremendous. There's one on the West Bank. There's one on general thing on Israel and the people. There's one on explaining the BDS movement. So you may want to pick that up. There's one called Apartheid South Africa versus Democratic Israel. That's great because that's what you hear liberals consistently charge Israel with. Is there an apartheid state? Vida will address that. So I'm just going to turn it over to her and let her go. And you've got about 45 minutes, a little after 12. 12:05, 12:10, something like that, and then we'll have Q&A. We're running just a little long, but that's okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. I know you could be doing anything else on this balmy Saturday morning. But thank you for being here with us for something that has become a very heart issue for me and also for Pastor Robbie. I wouldn't be here today, none of us would be here today, and we probably wouldn't know each other without Israel. So Israel is something that is so centered to God's heart and God's plan for humanity that what I want to talk about this morning is just some of what our responsibility is as, especially as Christians, as believers, and as followers of Jesus. We must take action. So what I want to talk about this morning is what is BDS, because people hear about these 3 letters a lot, and we want to talk about what is this, new boycott movement, which actually isn't very new. It's just an old thing that's become, modernized. And what is our response as Christians? So as Pastor Robbie said, my name is Vida Velasco. I work for an organization called Stand With Us. And who is Stand With Us? We are an Israel education organization, and we love Israel. And as we know, love is a verb, and it must be acted upon. And you demonstrate love, and the way that we demonstrate that love for Israel is that we educate people and we're a source of truth and facts for people who want to study this issue. And I came to Stand With Us about 5 years ago. I was actually a big first for the organization. I was their first non-Jewish Emerson Fellow at a Bible school. I'm a Moody girl. And so I was their first Emerson Fellow at Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. And some of you may know my mentor, Dr. Michael Rydelnik, who's the head of our Jewish Studies program there. He's the reason why I'm a Zionist, because he made my sister Serena Zionist, and then in turn, I came to discover, what is it about, the Jewish people, and how do they factor into our faith today? So because I love Israel and I love the Jewish people and I wanted to do something for them, I left my career as a broker in Manhattan. Did really well for myself at a young age, but I wanted to give something back. And God laid on my heart Israel and the Jewish people. And we're going to discover today what, again, is our responsibility as Americans and also most of all as Christians, and how do we deal with this Israel thing. So we're going to talk about, we have to ask ourselves a question, because anti-Semitism, unfortunately, has always been, throughout human history, an accepted form of racism. And it just, in every generation, it changes itself. And today, we are seeing, and I want to give you, it's less about what you know, but how you deal with what you're seeing and what you're receiving. Because, as human beings, we are creatures of data, right? We're always receiving data, and we're also sending out data to other people. So we have to know it's really important to have the right filters to know, okay, so what are people saying? How are people responding? And how does this affect action that's being taken against Israel? So the question that our goal for this morning is to see, okay, so what is this? What is anti-Zionism? And is it the new anti-Semitism? But before we get into that particular topic, we first have to look at what Zionism is. There are a lot of definitions out there about what Zionism is, a lot of notions about what Zionism is. But Zionism was born around the same time, and Pastor Robbie went through, like a really amazing, parallel narrative of, Christian Zionism and Jewish Zionism and how they, affected each other and needed each other. But Zionism was born around the same time as about a dozen other nationalist movements at the end of the 1800s. And it was simply the Jewish manifestation of nationalism. And you saw the rise of the Serbian, Macedonian, Greek, Romanian, Bulgarian, Kurdish, and other ethnic groups that were under Ottoman rule at the time who discovered that, yes, we agree that self-determination is something that we need. So Zionists, like all supporters of nationalist movements, shared in the significance of Israel as their homeland. And since Israel is where the Jewish people began as an ethnic and cultural group, which makes them indigenous to the Middle East, to the Levant, the entire Jewish identity was formed and attached to the land of Israel, as evidenced by centuries of longing to return to where they were from. Has anyone in here ever been to a Jewish wedding? Anybody? Okay, a few of you. When you go to a Jewish wedding, at the height of the joy, right before you are declared husband and wife, the husband will break a glass, step on a glass and break on it, commemorating the destruction of the temple, which is something that happened 2,000 years ago. So you think about that. In something as integral as a wedding ceremony, you have this people who remember things that are so ingrained in their identity as a people group, and it's directly attached to the land of Israel. Or celebrate any Jewish holiday. You think about the last Jewish holiday that was added to the calendar that Jesus himself actually celebrated, which is Hanukkah, right? There was a 2,000-year gap of new Jewish holidays being added to the Jewish calendar. So what happened? It took them 2,000 years to go home. But then, as soon as they became an independent sovereign state and were able to decide for themselves their own future, you started seeing new and really cool holidays being added to the calendar, because Jewish identity is directly tied to the land of Israel. So this is why someone like me and like you can be a Zionist, because I believe that the Jewish people being able to determine their own future is a necessary thing. And we know that the only way to effectively do that is by having sovereignty and therefore having the ability to make your own decisions. Whoa. So when you see and hear Israel being blamed, or the Israel-Palestinian conflict being cited as the root cause of the major problems in the world, this is an example of the classic anti-Semitic tropes of the quote-unquote international Jew being the main cause for the economic, political, and social problems in the world. The motto in 19th century Germany, saying that the Jews are our misfortune, has transformed itself into being Israel, the Jewish state, is our misfortune. So you now see Israel being blamed for general Middle East instability. If only we could solve the peace process between Israel and the Palestinians, then the rest of the Middle East would calm down. Or they're being blamed for increasing threats of terrorism against the West, just look at Europe, because Jews are allegedly in control of the entire world. And so it's their fault that we have terrorism today. And this culminated in 2001 when world leaders gathered in Durban, South Africa for the United Nations World Conference Against Racism. And their stated goal for gathering together for this conference was to make a worldwide plan to end racism in our generation. And after days of deliberation, only one state in the entire world was found guilty of racial discrimination. Can you take a wild guess who that was? It was Israel. So this is especially troubling since we discussed what Zionism truly is. And most countries around the world, unlike the United States, has an ethnic identity directly attached to their national identity. So since Israel is the outcome of the idea of Zionism and is inextricably linked to the cultural, historical, and religious identity of the Jewish people, when you see Jewish identity being attacked for what people are accusing Israel of doing, this is a part of how anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism. And the heart, as we know, as it says in Proverbs 4:23, is what we need to guard, for everything that we do flows from it. So the thoughts and notions that we have in our hearts directly affect the actions that we take every day. So when you see individual people being criticized and singled out because of what people are indicting Israel, the only Jewish state, of doing, this is anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. Well, can't someone be critical of Israel without being anti-Semitic? There is a difference between critique of a specific government policy that is based on clear, factual evidence, and critique that leads to denial of Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation-state or to defend themselves fully and adequately against credible threats. Criticism of Israel that is unsubstantiated, obsessive, or selectively applied also crosses the line. So Proverbs 26:26 speaks of how hatred covers itself with guile, meaning that we have to get beyond the words that are used, like human rights, peace, and justice, and look at what actions are being taken and why. So when Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization which rules the Gaza Strip, as part of their charter states that as the Islamic resistance movement paves its way, it will back the oppressed and support the wrong with all its might, and that it will spare no effort to bring about justice and defeat injustice. And yet, their actions are to shoot rockets deliberately at civilian targets, embedded in a civilian area. They are being more true to the goal of their charter, which discusses how they see any lands that were under Islamic rule previously at any time as being usurped. And so 1 Thessalonians 5:21 says that we must examine everything carefully and hold fast to what is good. And that's what we're going to do right now. So I want us to go through some of the big questions and some of the big indictments that people are asking or using to justify their stance against Israel and their lack of support for the Jewish people. So now that you are sensitized to this issue, you will need to know how to respond. So we're going to cover, is Israel illegally occupying Palestinian land? Is Israel practicing apartheid against the Palestinians? And is Israel committing genocide or ethnic cleansing against the Palestinians? So first we're going to look at occupation. In 1967, Israel initiated a defensive strategy in response to Egypt, Syria, and Jordan amassing troops on their border in what is now called the Six-Day War. So in 6 days, Israel did a miraculous thing. It conquered immense amounts of territory, resulting in the United Nations Resolution 242, which calls for a negotiated settlement to the conflict, followed by withdrawal from territories. The chief drafter of the resolution, Lord Carradine, said he deliberately chose ambiguous language so as not to recommend any set borders. So what is occupation? Okay, so usually when you need to look up a word, you look up in the dictionary, right? So according to Webster's dictionary, occupation is control and possession of hostile territory that enables an invading nation to establish military government against an enemy or to enact martial law against rebels or insurrectionists in their own territory. So since there was no clear sovereign at the time of the Six-Day War, the areas of Gaza, the Golan Heights, and the West Bank were and continue to be contested territories. Clear definitions of who is sovereign will be determined in a future peace agreement that hasn't been reached yet. And we can see here that occupation is not a good fit in this case, since Israeli occupation is not as broad or as all-encompassing as it may sound. There's zero Israeli presence in Gaza as Israel unilaterally withdrew in 2005 to be replaced with Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization. The West Bank itself is a little bit more complicated due to the Oslo Accords, which were signed in 1993, which were supposed to be a part of a phased peace negotiation that was going to bring about a sovereign Jewish state next to an Israeli Jewish one. And so the West Bank is broken up right now into 3 areas. So you see this area here, which is yellow stripe B, is Area A, which is under full Palestinian control. So the Palestinian Authority has full control over civil law and security, and this covers all major population centers of the Palestinian people. Area B, which is in green, is under Palestinian civil law and then joint security with Israeli forces. And then areas A and B constitute about 96% of Palestinian population. Area C, which is the lighter yellow, is the only area under full Israeli control, and it includes Israeli communities, most of which were rebuilt after the Jordanian occupation ended in 1967. So based on all of this information, we are talking about a complicated situation, and describing this situation as occupation is at best a misnomer, and at worst, it is a deliberate misrepresentation of the situation on the ground. So now we look at the next big question: is Israel practicing apartheid against the Palestinians? So here we see what apartheid actually was. And if I had been alive at the time, I would have stood up to it myself as well. Because apartheid is was a specific form of governance that was unique to South Africa. And actually the word apartheid comes from an Afrikaans word which means aparthood. So keeping people deliberately segregated. And it was a systematic parliamentary, so we're talking federal level, the highest level of governance in South Africa, created this body of laws that deliberately allowed a 20% white European, mostly Dutch origin minority to oppress an 80% black or colored majority in South Africa. So that also included indigenous peoples, also so not only black people, but other racial groups that were not white were cut off from most opportunity in the country. So when we look at the definition of apartheid, we can see that Israel doesn't fit this definition. But this is one of the main indictments against Israel that needs to be addressed as soon as you come in contact with it. Can anyone here tell me what was the first thing that helped bring about the end of apartheid South Africa? Something that the international community was involved in. I heard it. If I had a gold star, I would give you one. Yes. So it was a worldwide boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement that boycotted South African businesses, that didn't allow South African professors into, into universities. And it was putting economic pressure on apartheid South Africa. And that's eventually what brought about the ability of, those in South Africa under Nelson Mandela to then get rid of, this apartheid regime. So this is why it is so critical for us to know how to respond to people accusing Israel of apartheid, because they're using apartheid as justification for their support of this bigoted movement now against Israel, this boycott, divestment, sanctions movement against Israel, which we're going to get more in depth into in a little bit. But this is why this is so critical for us to know. So when someone accuses Israel of practicing apartheid or questions your support of Israel because they say it's an apartheid state, you must ask them what they mean, because it's important to understand that often we cannot answer a question in the way that it's framed. So when I ask people what they mean by apartheid, I usually get 3 different answers. So we're going to walk through the main responses and how to respond when Israel is accused of practicing apartheid. So sometimes people will tell me, Israel is practicing apartheid within Israel. And the evidence is overwhelming that this is a falsehood, plain and simple. Does Israel have issues with discrimination, and do minorities struggle with their role in society? Absolutely. Israel is not a perfect place, and they face the same challenges that any democracy that is diverse faces. Yet, as we discussed before, Israel does not have a systematic body of laws that deliberately close off anyone from any opportunity. Arabs make up about 20% of the population in Israel and are the largest minority group in Israel. You see this guy pictured here? Oh, sorry. This is a dear friend of mine. His name is George Deek. He's an Israeli Arab Christian, and he was one of the youngest ambassadors ever sent out by Israel, and he was the former ambassador to Norway. And he is, if you ever get to hear him speak or meet him, please do. He's phenomenal. And tell him I sent you, and you might have to hug him for me. But he's from Jaffa. His family's from Jaffa, and he's an Israeli diplomat. And Arabs have had the right to vote ever since the very first election in Israel in 1949. And you see here the 3 original Arab Knesset members. And what's a really fun fact is that this gentleman here, Tawfiq Toubi, he was the 2nd longest serving Knesset member. He served for over 40 years. The only person to beat his record is Shimon Peres, former president of Israel. And so there was no chance of anyone of color in apartheid South Africa to serve in any political office, and there were many, many jobs that were prohibited by law. They weren't even allowed to intermarry. So the evidence, again, is overwhelming that accusing Israel of apartheid is false. So sometimes people tell me that Israel's practicing apartheid against the Palestinians. And one of the pieces of evidence that they use is citing the apartheid wall that was built by the Israelis between 2001 and 2005. Does anyone in here know the reason for this security barrier being built?
Stop terrorist attacks.
Thank you. So it was to prevent suicide bombers and terrorists from harming Israeli citizens. So between 2000 and 2005, during the Second Intifada, Israel faced some of the worst terror, constant terror, any country has ever faced, where each week terrorists came into Israel from the West Bank. The entire country was affected. My sister, who I love like my life, she's my best friend, she went there 12 times during that period, and every single time I'm like, you are in the Lord's hands. I love you, but, it's a scary time. And she would tell us, she's like, no, actually it's a really great time because all the hotels are empty. They're so excited to have us there, and they're blessed by our presence. So as a result, as you can imagine, the Israeli government had to make difficult decisions to protect their citizens. And when Jews and Arabs live on both sides of the wall, how is this an apartheid wall? At best, again, it's a misnomer. This is another example of how anti-Semitism is, like we see it today as anti-Zionism. Because when people only focus on the effect, in this case the security barrier, and not the cause, which is terrorism, that is anti-Semitic. And also remember, 96% of the Palestinian population in the West Bank is under the governance of the Palestinian Authority. So only 4% of the population is affected by Israeli law in Area C. And then when you consider Gaza, there is 0 Israeli presence there due to their unilateral withdrawal in 2005. So how is it that Israel is practicing apartheid against people who are not governed by their laws? But when we examine laws and policies enacted by the Palestinian Authority, however, we see that those who are falsely accusing Israel of practicing apartheid are actually guilty of it. Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who is in his 10th year of his 4-year term, has made a policy of his government that any Palestinian who sells land to a Jewish person gets the death penalty. He openly says that when a Palestinian state is established, no Jews will be allowed to live there. Yet people only accuse Israel of apartheid, and then they try to convince you that they're not anti-Semitic. So the next big question is if Israel is enacting genocide or ethnic cleansing against Palestinians. This to me is even more slanderous than the apartheid charge, since this is attributing to the Jewish state one of the worst of all possible crimes against humanity, while at the same time ignoring the true horror of actual historical events of genocide, such as that which was suffered by the Jewish people themselves at the hands of the Nazi regime in World War II. A favorite false quote that's used by anti-Zionists was that David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, was specific in his supposed ethnic cleansing strategy. Ben-Gurion is accused of writing a letter to his son in 1937, stating that we will expel the Arabs and take their place. Yet as you can see here from the true translation, it is a maliciously manipulated quote. And if you consider the numbers, in 1970, the combined Palestinian Arab population in Gaza and the West Bank was a little over 1 million people. So it was about 1.03 million people. And by the last census in 2014, that number had climbed to 4.5 million. It's a terrible genocide. Yet we have to pay attention to how Palestinian children are being educated. Here we see Hitler pictured, and the message being sent by an official Palestinian Authority magazine is pretty clear. Those accusing Israel of genocide and ethnic cleansing are in turn teaching their society that the ideas of Hitler are acceptable. So why does this matter? As we know, the heart is the wellspring of action. The heart is where our thoughts, notions, and beliefs are seated. So when people think and believe that Israel is guilty of the crimes that we've discussed and more, it is not surprising that certain actions are then taken against Israel. And one of those actions is what we call support of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So what is the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement? I'm going to let you hear from the founders of BDS itself.
The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement.
And their message is clear.
We need to boycott Israel.
No one should buy Israeli products.
They invoke humanist, progressive, and socialist values.
Equality, freedom, and dignity.
Justice in Palestine.
A democratic movement based on the struggle for human rights.
And aim to garner the support of students, trade unionists,
The resistance of the Palestinian people only.
and even Jewish civil rights activists. BDS is particularly vigilant against any form of Palestinian-Israeli collaboration.
The end of a collaborationist Palestinian leadership.
In January 2010, Palestinian and Israeli filmmakers joined together to produce a series of films for the 13th annual Tel Aviv University Film Festival. Murad Nasser is a Palestinian director.
It is impressive of Tel Aviv University to bring Palestinian directors. This way we can use art to reach for peace, using artistic and cinematic projects.
The BDS leadership quickly denounced this collaboration and imposed a Palestinian boycott. In 2008, the Palestinian and Israeli trade unions signed a historic cooperation agreement. Shahar Saeed, General Secretary of the Palestinian Trade Union, praised the agreement for promoting the rights of Palestinian workers. BDS leadership, however, was outraged.
I don't understand in the TUC how we continue to associate ourselves with
Saeed was promptly forced to retract his statements and denounced any possible cooperation. Palestinian Al-Quds University signed a statement of academic collaboration with Israel's Hebrew University, committing to a pursuit of knowledge through cooperation rather than boycotts. Al-Quds University President Sari Nusseibeh explains.
It's very important, in fact, to create tolerance, pluralism, the ability to listen to the other, and this can be done through this kind of education.
Yet last year, under pressure from the BDS movement,
sever your collaborations, do not go to academic meetings, do not...
The university's board severed all ties with Israeli academic institutions.
Maybe the only way to get at peace is through having cooperation.
It's extremely important, an institutional boycott of Israeli academic and cultural institutions.
Incidentally, Omar is a student at Tel Aviv University. The moderates, Israelis, Palestinians, doctors, academics, artists, and peace activists, are in fact the principal victims of this self-labeled progressive social movement. What is it about Israeli-Palestinian collaboration that so threatens BDS? Moderates have been working towards a peaceful solution to the conflict since the 90s, under the guidelines of the widely accepted two-state solution.
The only resolution is for the aspirations of both sides to be met through two states, where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
Cet accord permettra aux deux peuples de vivre côte à côte dans la paix et la sécurité.
A two-state solution. And that's the only solution to this issue.
Two states, where Israelis and Palestinians each live in peace and security.
I clearly do not buy into the two-state solution. I clearly do not buy into the two-state solution.
The two-state solution, as typically expressed, is nothing more than a last-ditch plan to save Zionism.
So BDS isn't about peaceful coexistence or ending the occupation.
If the occupation ends, let's say, would that end your call for BDS? No, it wouldn't. The boycott...
Okay. So it's pretty clear you heard it from the source themselves. And these falsehoods have found their way into the church. Just a couple of months ago, I was in Portland, Oregon, attending the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church of the United States. I was also present in Detroit in 2014 when the PCUSA voted to boycott businesses that profit from Israeli war crimes. This also happened this summer at the General Assembly for the United Church of Christ and also the Mennonite Church in Canada. The Mennonite Church in the United States actually voted not to join the BDS movement, but they did in Canada because they do things differently up there. Just kidding. So what we see here is replacement theology in action. When we no longer take God at His word and we do not recognize the place of the Jewish people in God's heart, this is one of the results. We cannot deny that God loves His people and He is not done with them. And actually something that really proved to me that I can hold fast to His promises is His faithfulness, His unending, patient faithfulness to His own people. And Genesis 12:3 is as true today as it was when it was first spoken. My own life is a picture of how blessed a life can be by those who bless Israel. And we are also called to love our neighbor, aren't we? So how is being party to hatred being spread about the Jewish people an act of love? So the particular sin of Christian anti-Semitism is a dark stain on the soul of the church. It has been a thread throughout our history dating all the way back to the time of our first church fathers, of Justin the Martyr and Chrysostom's day. When Martin Luther, the father of the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, is quoted by Hitler as Christian justification for his policies of eradicating the Jewish people, when you see people calling themselves Christians accusing the Jewish people of deicide, which is, of being Christ killers, these people are the direct spiritual descendants of those Christians who killed Jews on Easter in Poland and Russia and enacted pogroms against the Jewish population because of those exact same lies. They are the spiritual descendants of those priests who would put rabbis on trial in tribunals during the Inquisition. Pictured here is a documentary called With God on Our Side. This documentary is an example of how Christians have rewoven classic anti-Semitic tropes with theological frames, and thousands of pastors around the world have received this documentary since it was released in 2010. And you see the same hatred being incorporated into major social justice movements like Black Lives Matter. Just a couple of weeks ago, the official platform of the Black Lives Matter movement accused Israel of apartheid and the United States as being complicit in the genocide being enacted against the Palestinian people. Do you hear anything familiar here? Those who oppose Israel have done a good job at what we call intersectionality. They allege that all oppressed people are connected, so they must support each other. Shouldn't we care about those in distress and under oppression? Without question. Yet the fact is that we cannot conflate issues that are completely different. And this kind of conflation does not build solidarity. So even though something like a boycott is considered nonviolent, that does not necessarily make it a peacemaking tool. So we cannot allow these movements to become idolized like the civil rights movement. There are terrible consequences. And the only outcome here is the greater isolation of the Jewish people and Israel. And we as believers cannot sit by and be silent. So Proverbs 31, 8 and 9 is one of my life verses. And it actually talks about what makes a good king, what makes a good leader. And we are called to be a voice for those who have none. There is not a large population of Jewish people in the world. And when you consider how a group of 15 million people worldwide gets so much attention, you also have to remember that in many parts of our world, Jewish people have no voice. Even in this great state of Texas, there are many corners where there is no Jewish presence. So we must be their voice, like we are called to do. So please educate yourself, immerse yourself in the truth, and speak the truth to others. Seek out God's heart, for when it comes to his people, he will reveal it to you. It's not by accident that you are here today. We are called to a special role of being watchmen on the wall. So let us speak the truth of Israel and the Jewish people to those around us. Jesus says that he's the way, the truth, and the life. And the core of who we are as believers is to seek truth and to pursue it. Israel today is a light in a dark place. It is diverse and vibrant, and it's the only country in the Middle East where the Christian population is growing and is welcome. So let us be true agents of reconciliation. This is my challenge to all of you today and every day. So thank you, and I'll take any questions.
How is it possible?
Oh.
Hold it. Got to record your question for posterity.
The founder of the BDS movement.
Yes.
At that time that he founded it, was he still a student at Tel Aviv University?
He was. He has graduated, and even at the time when the BDS movement was getting off of the ground, there was so much pressure inside and outside of Israel for Tel Aviv University to drop him as a student, and they didn't do that. He has graduated.
My problem with that is it seems very hypocritical, right? Because he's saying to boycott all Israel. He should have just dropped out. Why would he get an education from an Israeli university?
Because they have excellent schools.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yes, that's my dilemma.
That's double think at its best.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Some other questions.
Years ago, I was able to get some wonderful Dead Sea lotion from Israel, but I wondered if you knew some stores or ways to get Israeli products.
Actually, no, this is one way that all of us can help.
Yes.
Because instead of, let's buy all of the Israeli products that you possibly can. Okay? I'll give you a great example. They used to do the BDS movement used to do boycott Israeli goods days. So we used to do buy Israeli goods days, and we actually still do that. And so when I was still a student at Moody, I brought 60 of my closest friends to the closest Trader Joe's, because Trader Joe's actually has quite a bit of Israeli products. And we had a list. And we spoke to the manager and we're like, we want all of this stuff. They're like, why? Well, we're really glad that you source Israeli goods and we want all this. We bought it all. And then we went in the next week looking for the same stuff, and they had actually increased their inventory because they're like, wow, there's a demand for this stuff. So let's do that. Yes, there are plenty of places. Actually, the best place to get it is online. And it's really good for your skin. I mean, this doesn't happen by accident, okay? I do use some of that myself. So, yes, I would even be happy to send you some.
How is it possible that Israel can be accused of genocide and apartheid when thousands of Arabs, including Palestinians, are allowed to work and travel in and out of Israel? How do they get away with that charge?
I have an answer. I hear questions like this all the time, and the answer is you're asking for a rational explanation of an irrational action.
Yes.
Okay? It's like so many things in this life that come out of the left. We're asking for rational explanations for irrational, emotional-based policies, and there's no answer.
Right. Well, and the other thing that you have to keep in mind too is that we live in an increasingly illiterate society, where we have a society that's illiterate not only just in literature, but in history and in why we are where we are today. And so when you have a society that doesn't understand what these things actually mean, why is it that I have to speak in front of audiences and define so basically and clearly what these things are? Is because they don't know. And so that is one of the reasons why they can get away with it. And but those who actually know what it is or have lived through it are deeply offended by it, because it does not apply to Israel and it diminishes their own suffering and what they've come through. So that's why it is imperative upon us to not let people get away with it. And all of you are on, you're all educated now, so you can't, I have high expectations. You cannot. It starts with us. It's not them anymore. It's all of us, and we have to be the ones who say, no, that is not accurate. You can't get away with that, and I'm not going to let you. And it doesn't matter if you don't change that person's mind. You don't know who your unseen audience is. And when those people see that this is not true, the truth will set them free of their notions, and then they're going to be, they're going to come alongside us and walk alongside us.
He's got one follow-up question.
Yes.
And I was wondering why they don't interview some of these people that are employed, these Arabs, and try to get their testimony on record. And by the way, a couple of years ago, I spoke to an Israeli soldier that was visiting family here in Houston, and I asked him about the wall, and he said that the wall has cut down 80 to 90%
98%.
Yes.
98% of terror. Yes. So let me answer your original question. You have to. So I actually have a lot of Palestinian friends, and who are from Gaza and the West Bank, mostly in the West Bank. And one thing that is and anyone who has Palestinian friends will tell you this, that whenever someone asks them a question, it is a reflex of theirs to look around the room and see if they're in a safe place, because they are not allowed to speak their minds. I have a friend who on April 8th of 2015 posted on his Facebook just something very normal that any of us would be like, why is that a big deal? He posted on his Facebook that he wishes that there could be elections because he wants better leadership, because he wants to vote in an election so that he can get better leadership. He was put in jail on April 11th, and I haven't heard from him since. They are under so much government control that they cannot speak freely. So you would actually be putting a death sentence on these people. And those who have been courageous, there are Palestinian peace activists who have spoken up and who have stood up, and they and their families are under heavy attack. And so that's one of the reasons why you don't hear these stories. And that's why, again, we have to be the voices of these people. Because if we're going to be agents of reconciliation, we must speak the truth. And when you're able to share that with people, I want you to take all of these stories and share with other people, because it's important. That's one of the reasons why, yes, for us it's illogical. Why do people get away with, this? And why has the frame that people see Israel through changed so much? It's because we let it happen. So it has to stop now.
Is there any move to delegitimize the UN? Now, you laugh. Where I'm coming from is the only good thing, or the major good thing the UN did was recognize the state of Israel in 1948. But it was really formed by a communist, Alger Hiss, under FDR, and we could go on that subject, but I don't take the UN very seriously at all. And it's now become a mob of Arab left-wing, that kind of thing.
So here's my answer to that. The United Nations, which was formed after the failed League of Nations, they did one of their main goals was to decolonize the world. And they did that too well, because they didn't have a plan of how do we transition over into moving the power structure from the colonists into indigenous rule. And so, of course, as we know, when there's a power vacuum, the most organized party will come in, and usually it's a dictatorship. So then the United Nations had this very difficult decision to make at that point. Were they going to leave out most of the new family of nations out, or were they going to allow them in? And so they then violated their own charter, which was to allow, you couldn't be a member originally if you weren't a functioning democracy. They made an exception of that almost immediately. And then that's why you saw, this block of countries that then started taking over, and then you see what the United Nations has morphed into today. So that's the reason, and so they wanted to, and so the the international community and the Western world had this, misguided notion that, well, maybe if they're in the family, we can influence them. No, that didn't happen. But one thing that we have done in the past, and which I wish, and it's because we haven't had real leadership in a while in this country. But one of the, the last time that we stopped, so it was under the Reagan administration, there were several times that we stopped sending, our, United Nations dues, and it sent a really strong message. So if we were to, if we were to do that again today, money moves things. So, that's something that if there was enough pressure for us to, to say, this has got to stop, we can't support this anymore. But then you also look at, the fact that we, the Palestinian Authority is the largest recipient of foreign aid in the entire world, and they're not even a set country. And we send them foreign aid every single year. And even though they're in violation of the very things that they said that they would adhere to, which enabled them to receive aid from us, what if, could you imagine if the citizens of this country cried out against that? That would make some changes. These are things that we can all do.
Okay, we've got time for one more question.
Ignorance is a function of, I know 95% of the people that I speak with, when they think of BDS, they're thinking of boycott Israeli products, mm-hmm. and that's about it. Well, I have a couple of questions. One, I thought the BDS movement was primarily for products and that kind of thing in the what they call the occupied area. And also, my second question is, what is being proposed by the BDS movement? What sanctions? What divestment? What boycott? Really, when people agree to become a part of that BDS movement, what exactly are they agreeing to? It can't be just a, hey, boycott and sanction. There has to be some kind of, very specific actions. Yes. There
are, and there is a difference between what is considered under the official BDS movement. I refuse to use their language because when you use other people's language, it gives legitimacy to what they're doing. So this economic pressure that's being put on Israel, it comes in many, many different forms. But the most visible of them are, the boycott of Israeli products, and it really doesn't matter where they're from. Because most of those people believe that all of Israel is occupied. So it really doesn't matter where it's from. And one of the only reasons why they will do, what they consider the labeling and things, is to try to have a show of, well, we're making distinctions, but they really don't. But then you see the outcomes of, because I always look at the effect of what people do. And when you see Palestinians themselves losing their livelihoods, you just look at the example of SodaStream, which was an excellent example of, normalization. Because what I care about are, we need to take action to to help people remember that there are human beings involved in this. This dehumanization of the Jewish people and even the Palestinian people. That you see that especially people involved in this in this boycott movement, they almost they treat the Palestinians as if they can't make their own decisions, and we have to make your decisions for you, and which is so, that's so wrong. We should be helping them decide for themselves. So there are many, many permutations that it takes. One of the big ones is, on the academic side of how, on campuses and universities, nationwide and around the world, you'll have Israeli speakers and professors who are not welcome. And they're because of all of the things, all of the crimes that Israel's, is being accused of. So, and they're being boycotted culturally. Like where, like just the other day, there was a famous Israeli dance troupe who wanted to use music from a certain artist, and he said no. And there are, artists from around the world who want to perform in Israel, and whenever they pronounce dates of, adding Israel as part of their worldwide tour, they are under immense pressure and get death threats, from these, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist people, because they want to, what they're seeking to do is to isolate Israel in any kind of way, to highlight, their crimes against humanity, and then these same people are crickets, when you think about Syria or Iraq or, like any of the other places where people are really suffering and are, like in actual war zones. So it comes in many forms, and, if you want more information on, like, how do we combat it on every single level, there's this guy in the back, and then we actually have a huge array of, like further information that you can have, and then how you can get involved, and help us, be active in supporting Israel in a real way.
All right. We need to wrap up.
We do.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That was great. Okay. As we close out, we're going to have the offering plates. Have a couple of men just pass those if you wish to contribute to the expenses of the conference. We appreciate that very much. I know several people did. And then as they do that, just go ahead while I'm talking, just start passing them. Again, if you have any questions about anything related to the conference, you can email related to deanbibleministries.org. You also have the information up on the screen with Vida's and Jesse's email address at StandWithUs, and you can email them questions. All of this material is going to be available on the deanbibleministries.org website, and so you can access it there. I encourage you to hopefully, thank you for being here this morning, also the last couple of nights, and encourage you to be here tomorrow night, Sunday night, with Ambassador Yorm Ettinger. He is dynamite. I mean, he is beyond impressive, okay? His command of the information. Somebody was asking a question. I don't know if they're here right now. Somebody was asking a question earlier about related to in tech industry and investments. Who is that? Is that you? Okay, he's the guy to ask about that. I mean, he has all that information on the tip of his mental fingertips. He's just phenomenal with all that kind of information. So be here. That's at 6:30 tomorrow night. He'll talk for about an hour, then we'll have about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to have a special closing film that you're going to love. Okay? I'm not going to say what it is, but you're going to love it, and that'll last about 20 minutes after that. So I'll have a little 10-minute break, get some coffee and a snack, come back, and we'll watch the film and then close it out. Okay? Thank you very much. Let me close in prayer quickly. Father, thank you for this time and what we've learned. Help us to be stronger advocates for Israel, be able to state our case clearly and concisely. May we be armed with facts rather than emotion, that we may be able to honor and glorify you through our support of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And we pray this in Christ's name. Amen.